On today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, we're going to discuss why Eberechi Eze will be our most important signing of the summer. We're going to try and pick out some things from his performance at Anfield, albeit just a 20-minute cameo that show and identify exactly what I am talking about. We're going to get into all of that. Plus, we'll take lots of your thoughts and lots of your questions from the live chat. It's a bit of a free-for-all today's episode because, well, it's the international break, isn't it? And that's just how it works. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, how are we doing? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. It is Wednesday, 3rd of September. The international break is here. And I'm not going to say that I want it. Like, I never want those early international breaks. I always feel like just when you get back into the swing of things, boom, they drop an international break. And all of a sudden, you're kind of scrambling around and trying to find things to, A, if you do a podcast, talk about, and B, to do at the weekend to get you out of doing anything around the house, basically. I mean, that's what I find anyway. But I think this time around, there's quite a bit to unpack because the season has started and Arsenal have got 6 points from 9. You've got to incorporate into your thinking that they have been to Old Trafford and been to Anfield in 2 of those 3 games. So it's by no means a disastrous total, but it probably should have been more. Okay, we should have at least got a point from Anfield, in my opinion. And if we come away from that game and we sign out ahead of the international break with 7 points from 9, I think everybody's feeling quite comfortable and quite confident about where we're at. Now, obviously, that wasn't to be the case, and we ended up losing the game, and we've discussed the game at length, and we've covered it off probably on 2 episodes now, plus the Patreon piece that we did, which you can check out, by the way, patreon.com/the Chronicles of a Gooner. If you want to support the pod, you will find our video analysis of that Liverpool game. I think for me, I'm fine with, I'm not going to say I'm fine with, because that would suggest that I'm okay with us losing games of football. I'm not, obviously. But I'm not as worried or as concerned, I think, as the vast majority. I think we've gone out and brought in players to try and, add strength in depth, add cover. We've also brought in players that we would regard, and I've talked about this a lot over the course of the summer, as needle movers. And it feels like the vast majority of those needle movers have come at the top end of the pitch. Okay, so you've brought Zubimendi in at central midfield, and obviously, you know, people believe that over time he'll show himself to be an upgrade on Thomas Partey. Then you look at what we've done in the defense, and you'd say, okay, Nkapie comes in and Mosquera comes in, and those guys add depth and probably represent upgrades on what we had there. We've let Tomiyasu go. We've let Kieran Tierney go. We've let Jakub Kivior go, etc., etc. The top end of the pitch is where people are hoping to see a real difference. And so far, we haven't seen enough, I don't think. I think that's fair to say. You look at the game at Old Trafford, we didn't show anything in attack, and we nicked the game based on a set piece, but again, leaning on what's been our biggest strength over the last couple of seasons, which is our defensive solidity. We then play Leeds at home, and despite scoring 5 goals against Leeds, seeing our new centre forward score a brace, the takeaway from that game and the general consensus appeared to be, anyway, from where I'm sitting, oh, well, it was Leeds. You know, they're flat track bullies. The truth is somewhere in between. The truth is that for periods of that game against Leeds, we weren't great. But in other periods, we showed that we can be ruthless. And our centre forward, who is under a lot of pressure to deliver and to perform, got off to a decent start by making it, at that point, 2 goals in 2 Premier League games. And even now, when you look at his record, 2 goals in 3 Premier League games, it still reads well, doesn't it? And at the end of the season, if we look at what Victor Gyökeres has produced, and the vast majority of those goals have come against the quote-unquote lesser sides, the sides that we've had trouble breaking down, the low blocks that we've struggled to breach in recent years, as long as that gets us where we want to get to, who cares? Who cares? I think for me, the disappointing thing about the game at Anfield specifically was, in part, the lineup, because it's not the lineup that I would have picked. But for me, it was more so to do with the management of the game. For me, it was more so to do with Mikel Arteta's, I think, reluctance to make those changes early enough that, as I've said, would have seen us go into the ascendancy before Liverpool started to grow into the game. And that might have seen the game go our way. Okay. It's very easy to talk about this with the benefit of hindsight. It's very easy to kind of be critical of someone's approach when you already know what the outcome was. Okay. So I appreciate that and I acknowledge that. But look, the point I want to make is I did want to touch on this stuff right at the top of the pod, because I think I've seen way more discourse online and heard more discourse on the radio, seen it on the television than I think is warranted for what happened on Sunday. Okay, I've heard people saying, well, actually going to Anfield at this stage in the season, it's a free hit. And because of how much football there is still to be played, the fact that Liverpool have to come to the Emirates, etc., actually, we should have rolled the dice and really gone for it. Well, I agree with that, sort of looking bigger picture. But I also think if you're calling the game a free hit and that's your justification for Arsenal not being attack-minded, how can you lose your mind about Arsenal losing the game narrowly based on an unbelievable free kick from Dominic Szoboszlai? I'm not saying that I disagree with those who believe that Arsenal should have been braver in their approach, because that was my view too. What I'm saying is that once you've said your bit, once you've made your point, does the discourse really need to continue into the international break, run throughout the international break? I don't think it does. So I personally want to draw a line now under that game at Anfield. We learned some lessons from it. And the lesson for me is that when you go and play a team like Liverpool at Anfield and they're not quite at it, you have to smell the blood and you have to go for them when the opportunity presents itself. That's what the champions would do. Okay? So that's me. And that's how I feel about it. But I'm not going to talk about it now for the rest of this week and all of next week until Arsenal next play a game, because I don't think there's any need. I don't think it's that big a deal. I think people have forgotten that we went there with no Saka. We went there with no Havertz. We went there with a Martin Odegaard who didn't have anything more than 20 minutes in the tank. You've got to factor all of these things in. So I'm not saying that I agree with Mikel's approach. And if it happens again and again and again, I've got no problem in calling it out and sort of voicing my frustrations about it. But like we've said our bit, we've done it to death. Do we really need to spend the duration of the international break going over the same thing? No. I prefer to focus on what we can do better and who is going to be important to Arsenal improving in the final third. And that's why on today's episode, I really, really want to focus on Eberechi Eze, because even though he played 20 minutes, that's it, 20 minutes up at Anfield on Sunday, I think he made a really, really big difference. And I think the fact that he beat Dominic Szoboszlai, the right back on the day, and I haven't looked at the numbers, but probably just based on what I remember, more times than Gabriel Martinelli did over the course of 70 minutes. I think that kind of fueled people's frustration and has got people to a point where they're going, well, why didn't Eberechi Eze start? And I don't think we really have the excuse with Eze of saying, well, he's just come in, he's behind in pre-season, he's finding his feet, etc., etc. No, we don't, because Eze had played for Crystal Palace. Eze was unlucky to miss out on the game that we played. I beg your pardon, at home against Leeds, because he was registered just slightly later than the deadline, which meant that he couldn't feature. So he's only missed 1 week, but he had a full preseason. He played in the Community Shield, so he's had that extra game that our players haven't had. The only thing was that he had a slightly longer period in between games than everybody else. But for me, he could have played. And again, then that takes you back to the initial team selection. And again, I think that Mikel should have been braver in the initial team selection, but I can also understand the thinking behind go there, be compact, make sure you get a foothold in the game, grow into the game, and your starters are not necessarily going to be your finishers, particularly now in modern football where you can make 5 changes. You can essentially change half of your outfield team. So that's how he would have viewed it and processed it, I'd imagine. Okay. But what I want to focus on, as I say, is Eberechi Eze, because I got to be honest, like there was a point in the summer where while I knew I really wanted the player, I wondered if sticking him out on the left-hand side was going to work. And when it became apparent that we were moving to sign him, or that we held a very strong interest, there were a lot of reports at the time saying Arsenal are after Eze, but they're also after a left winger as well. And that made me think at the time that perhaps Eze wasn't coming in to play on that left-hand side. And maybe the idea was for him to come in and play a more central role, and that we might go and get a left winger. We didn't in the end, and I think that's absolutely fine. Noni Madueke is an option over there. Noni Madueke, by the way, who played very, very well up at Anfield. And, I'm looking forward to hopefully eating some humble pie around that signing. I really, really am. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I hope he does well. I hope he does brilliantly. It didn't make sense to me at the time. The cost didn't make sense to me. But if he performs, then, I'll be the first person to hold my hands up and say I was wrong, and say sorry. I would, because I want Arsenal Football Club to succeed first and foremost. And if we've got a player performing at a very, very high level, that, of course, improves our chances, doesn't it? But yeah, with Eze, I wasn't really sure where he was going to fit in. I think for me, though, if you go through all of our summer signings, okay, so if you work it from the back, okay, Kepa Arrizabalaga came in as a goalkeeper to replace Neto as the backup. Upgrade, yes. Mosquera and Nkapie have come in essentially to replace Tomiyasu and Kivior. Upgrade, I really like the look of Mosquera. I really like the look of Nkapie. I think he's an upgrade on Kivior. So I think we will, by the end of the season, be saying that we've upgraded there as well. In midfield, Zubimendi versus Partey, I think that would be argued as an upgrade by a lot of people, but I still think that while you might have a point if you believe that Zubimendi is the better of the two players all round, I still think that the jump up isn't as significant as people make it out to be. And I think that Zubimendi, in the first couple of away games, has just struggled a little bit with the physicality of the league. And that was always something that he was going to need to adapt to. And hence why I wasn't as excited about the signing as others. I think in the long term, we'll look at that and say, really good bit of business, great price, good player. But just while he's finding his feet, I think it's fair to say that the upgrade from Partey to Zubimendi isn't huge. There might be an upgrade there. I'll accept that. But I'm not sure how big that upgrade is at this moment in time. And then you look at the wide options that we brought in, Madueke, certainly an upgrade as cover. And you could make the case, based on Martinelli's recent performances, that he's an upgrade on Gabby Martinelli as well. And I wouldn't argue against that. Gyökeres is an upgrade on Kai Havertz in terms of his goal-scoring capability, but maybe not in terms of his all-round game. I guess the point I'm trying to make here, and I've gone around the houses a little bit, is that we have made upgrades all around the pitch. But no upgrade that Arsenal have made this summer is as significant an upgrade as the upgrade from Martinelli to Eze on that left-hand side. Now, they're different players, granted. They'll play the role differently. Martinelli is more your traditional winger. Martinelli's more likely to take someone on the outside. He's more likely to hold his width. He's more likely to get back and help you out defensively. But in terms of just pure ability and threat in and around the penalty area, Eberechi Eze is a huge upgrade on Gabriel Martinelli. Now, this is not me sitting here and having a go at Martinelli, because he's a player who came to Arsenal very, very young, who I've really liked for a long time, who I've always admired for his work rate, for his attitude, for the way that he cares. But the more and more you watch him, the more and more you realize that in the final third, he's just missing that killer sort of bit of instinct. He doesn't pick out the right passes more often than not. He doesn't make the right decisions. He hesitates at times. Does he always have the quality to make things happen when you need him to? And the answer to that would probably be no. And I don't know how much of that is based on his ability. And I don't know how much of that is based on maybe where he's at in terms of his headspace right now. How confident is he? Is the noise around him getting to him? Is the fact that we've gone and got Madueke in who can play from the left, that we've gone and got Eze in and kept Leandro Trossard, has that caused him to maybe overthink things, to panic a little bit when given the opportunities because of how desperate he is to take them and succeed? I don't know. But for me, Eberechi Eze, in that short cameo at Anfield, in just 20 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever it was, if you include added time, showed that he's on a different level in terms of the way he can beat players, the way he can glide past them, not just with pure pace, but with trickery, with skill. We know that he's a more accomplished finisher than Gabriel Martinelli. We know that he's more likely to hit a shot from distance that works. We know he can take free kicks. He just brings an added level of quality onto that left-hand side. And I think everybody in the team is going to benefit from that. Everybody in the team is going to benefit from that. One of the conversations that I've had a lot about Eze playing from the left with friends and colleagues is, okay, but then who do you pick at left back? Because you probably need a left back that's a bit more defensively sound if you're going to partner them up with Eberechi Eze, because he's not going to give you what Gabriel Martinelli would give you going the other way. And I think for me, actually, another one of the big takeaways of mine from Sunday's game was that, you know what? Ricardo Calafiori can do that. If you ask Ricardo Calafiori and you instruct him to be just a little bit more conservative, he can absolutely do that. And he can overlap because he's left-footed. Nkapie is coming in, and there's a comment from Jeremy in the chat who says Nkapie is the one because he can overlap. Calafiori can overlap too. I just think for me right now, there were a few questions I had going into the season about balance, combinations, and that is something that we're going to have to iron out over time, because until you put players in match situations with their new teammates, you're still going to be in the dark a little bit with regards to how certain things are going to work. So I think Eze on the left-hand side, with Calafiori being the version of himself that he was at Anfield, I think that can work. Now, I think there'll be games where Calafiori will get more license than he did at Anfield, because you'll be playing against lesser opposition. Maybe you're at home, and there'll be that feeling that with Calafiori pushing on, Big Gabby, Saliba or Mosquera, whoever's fit, and one of White or Timber can shift into the back three shape that we see so often when Arsenal are in possession, and that'll be absolutely fine. But I guess the point I'm making on Calafiori is that I didn't know whether he was capable of, and it's mad to say because he's a centre-back really by trade and has been a defender throughout his career, but I didn't know if he was capable of just reining it in and focusing on that defensive side of the game without switching off, without getting drawn into something, without getting lured into something that would maybe see him exposed at some point. I think one of my takeaways, as I keep saying, from that Liverpool away game was that actually Ricardo Calafiori can stay concentrated. He can do those things. And if he's fit, he's one hell of a player. And at the moment, people keep saying, well, when's Lewis Skelly going to get back in the team? I absolutely love Lewis Skelly. Where's Nkapie going to play? When's Nkapie going to play? Again, a signing I really, really like the look of. But right now, based on the early season, based on the first 3 games, okay, that left back position, it belongs to Ricardo Calafiori. And until he gets injured, which could happen because it happens a lot, or he makes a mistake, or someone else gets an opportunity and grabs it with both hands, there's no reason for Mikel Arteta to change that. There's no reason whatsoever. Calafiori has been fantastic at the start of this season. But I think for me, what I'm really, really excited about is Eberechi Eze from the left-hand side, because I think that just gives us such a boost. And also, I do feel like right now that teams look at us and they go, Arsenal are very right-sided heavy in terms of the way they build up, the way they play, where their threat comes from. And I feel like having a player of Eze's quality on the left-hand side, what that does is it gives people something else to worry about that they don't have to worry about right now. And in doing that, you gain unpredictability, you gain the ability to play through both sides and vary up and change it up. And listen, when you make a lot of signings, okay, and Liverpool are going to find this as well. And Liverpool, I don't think their performances have been great at the start of the season. People would argue that they're going to be the champions and they are the favourites because they've managed to pick up results even when they haven't played particularly well. But you don't always pick up results if you continuously play badly. And I'm not saying that they are going to play badly throughout the duration of the season. The point I'm trying to make is that do not fall into the trap of believing that there isn't going to be any teething problems at Liverpool. with all the signings that they've made. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that it's all just going to be smooth for them. They won't lose any games. They won't draw any games. They won't drop any points. Of course, that is going to happen. Of course, it's going to happen. It will happen to every team. No one wins this league without dropping any bloody points, do they? No one wins this league unbeaten, except for a certain club on the red side of North London. But you get what I'm trying to say. So I feel like right now, we've got to draw under, a line under what happened at Anfield. We don't need to be having a debate about whether Arteta should be sacked or not. Like, we're 3 games into the season. That, for me, is a huge overreaction. And it's unfortunately something that we see far too often in the Arsenal space. I think it's bad enough that we, as a fan base, feel like we need to have these debates after every single result and after every single performance. But the last thing we need is to allow what the kind of Northwest media, the Man United / Liverpool driven media, are saying to creep into our thinking. Okay, we all know that the result at Anfield last Sunday was disappointing. We all know that Arsenal needed to do more in the final third. We all know that Mikel Arteta probably has regrets, whether he'd admit that publicly or not, about, you know, how he went about it. Maybe not so much from the start of the game, but certainly as the game developed and as it changed. We all know that stuff, okay? And we've discussed it and we've been over it. And what we want to see is that we've learned from it and we move forward and we don't do the same thing again. People will argue that we've been too defensive and too negative or too risk averse, is a better way to put it, in the past. But I don't really have a massive issue with someone going to Anfield and saying safety first, at least not from the beginning of the game. When the game shapes up the way it did, I think you've got to be more proactive than we were. And I'll say that over and over and over again, because that's my view and that's my opinion. But the way this is developed from a let's have a discussion about the approach to the manager should be sacked, it's honestly, it's mind-blowing how flip-flop people can be. And I can't take it. And there'll be people out there that say, yeah, but I've wanted Arteta out for years. Well, Arteta has improved Arsenal dramatically. Arteta's made Arsenal a serious football club again. The only reason we went to Anfield expecting maybe to win, and the reason we've come away as disappointed as we have, is because he has raised that bar. And let's not forget that. Let's not forget that. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say. And again, just to finish off on the Eze point, before we go into the chat and take your questions and thoughts. So start getting them into the live chat. I want to hear from you. Get your thoughts in, get your questions in. Also, don't forget to leave a like on the video. All of that stuff really, really does help. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're with us on this particular platform. If you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, please do leave us a review as well. All of that stuff really, really does help. But the final point I want to make on Eze is, in Eze, we've got a player with trickery, a player that can glide inside, a player that can score goals, a player that will strike fear into the opposition. And I don't feel that we've had that on the left-hand side for a long time. And as much as I like Gabriel Martinelli and think he's a very, very useful part of the squad, you know, I feel like Leandro Trossard, again, falls into that category of good squad player, but not really a starter. I feel like, for me, you know, we've just allowed ourselves to go a little bit stale in the final third as a result of that. And so the combination of having an out-and-out centre forward and Eberechi Eze and hopefully Bukayo Saka back soon, I think that's going to, by default, really raise the bar for us in the final third. And so while there is frustration around what happened at Liverpool and how little Eberechi Eze played, I think in time you are going to see that he will prove to be our most important signing of the summer. And my rationale behind that is, as I explained earlier on in the pod, because of all the upgrades that we've made on the pitch. This is the biggest upgrade. This is the most significant upgrade. This is where we've gone from A to D instead of kind of A to B. You know, we've gone a couple of extra steps by bringing Eze in to play on that left-hand side. And I hope he does play on that left-hand side. I don't want to see this kind of, well, you know, he's not really a winger type stuff. No, like, we've just got to adapt the way that we play. If we need a bit more width on that left-hand side, get it from the left back. Rather than sending the left back in field all the time, send the left back on the outside. We've got to find a way of accommodating Eberechi Eze. We have to, because he will be the difference maker. He will be the needle mover as far as I'm concerned. Okay, short pause. And when we come back, we'll take some of your questions and thoughts from the live chat. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner Pod.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right, baby. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Like and subscribe. Let's take some of your questions, some of your thoughts from the live chat. Bill says, we could and should have come away with a draw. We were denied a penalty. Eze should have started the game. I watched him a couple of times while he was out on loan from QPR. His class was obvious. Yeah, I think people have always felt that Eberechi Eze is a big talent. Like, I think that's certainly true. I think he's shown his trickery. How calm he is really kind of struck me as well. Like, it can come across as looking a little bit casual, but that's not what it is. It's just someone who's quite comfortable, I think, in his own skin, believes in his ability and believes in his ability to impact football matches. Should we have had a penalty? I mean, I don't think so, mate. I'm fine with that not being given. I think we've got into this really kind of dangerous territory with refereeing decisions now where, we're trying to pull the game up for every single tiny little thing. And actually we've gone too far. So I feel like if I started moaning about that, I'd be contributing to the hysteria that has already kind of taken over our sport at the moment. Should Eze have started the game? Again, I don't have that much of an opinion on that either way. And I know it sounds like I'm sitting on the fence. My point is I could see why you would start him. I could also see why Mikel decided to go the way that he did. As I've said before, my big issue was with the way that we failed to recognize the pattern of the game early enough and the fact that we didn't smell blood early enough. And Liverpool were allowed to make those changes that they did before we made ours, which meant that there was only one team in the ascendancy. And that was because one team had been proactive. And people will argue that because they were at home, the onus was on them and that they needed to be more proactive. But yeah, I've said my bit on the Liverpool game over and over again, and my opinion is not really going to change. But I agree with you that we could have and probably absolutely should have come away with a draw. Tony says, what happens to Trossard when all the players are fit? Trossard's a squad player now. Trossard, I don't think has ever really been able to hold down a starting position in this team from the day he arrived. It's always kind of been in and out, him or Martinelli. It's never been, clear that he was one of the go-to players and a starter. And when he has been, it's largely been because of injuries. I'm surprised actually that we didn't try and move Trossard on this summer. I am. We gave him the improved contract terms, which is something that was already pre-agreed. But I think, we're not going to get any money for him at the end of the season, are we? So, I think maybe just keeping him now rather than again. Look, it comes down to the interest. Okay, it comes down to the interest because it's easy to say I would have moved Trossard on, and I would have. But at the same time, if nobody comes in with a decent offer, then, then where do you sell him? And we found that, didn't we, towards the back end of the window with a lot of players. You looked at, for example, people like Fabio Vieira. We thought we were going to get decent money in from Stuttgart. Didn't materialize. We've ended up sending him out on loan. We thought we might get decent money for Zinchenko, maybe, or something at least, and we didn't. We've had to send him out on loan. So it's very easy and sort of common, I think, actually, to look at players and go, well, I look at him, I'll slap a £10 million price tag on him. We should get 5, 6 for him. We should get 8 for him, 12 for him. But unless that interest is there, then there's no sale. And I think Arsenal were probably open-minded to letting Trossard go this summer if an offer came in that was suitable. But seeing as it didn't, I think they've obviously taken the decision that we're not going to push him out the door. We'd rather keep a hold of him because we don't want what happened last season to happen again. And Mikel Arteta told me that himself after the game against Leeds. He said, we've had a conversation with the group within the squad and we decided that we could not afford to let what happened last season happen again. And in all of this discourse from the Liverpool game, okay, we went to Anfield and we were competitive without all those key players missing, which I know isn't a silver lining when you've just lost a game, but it does show you that we do have better depth now. And so even with a few injuries, and it's more than a few because we lost Saliba, we had no White, we had no Norgard, Odegaard wasn't fit enough to start. It shows you that we're at a higher level even with injuries. So there has been work done to improve the squad, to improve the depth. And Trossard obviously has his role to play in that. Junior Gunner says, I think if this reactive, boring style of football yielded more success, it would be more tolerable. But if you're going to play like Simeone or Mourinho, you need to win, and fans are growing impatient. Yeah, but that's one of the oldest truths in football, right? For a long, long time, it's always been, well, if you get the result, then people are not really going to question your style. The naysayers will, and the haters will, and the opposition will. But ultimately, if you are getting results, you're justified in what you're doing. The means kind of justify the end, right? And that's where we are at now. Like, had we gone and won 1-0, nicked it, I mean, look at the stark contrast in the reaction to the Man United game. Man United, we played crap, probably worse than we played at Anfield. In fact, definitely worse than we played at Anfield. But because we won, it was, look how good and solid the defense is. Because we lost at Anfield, it's, look how toothless the attack was. The focus will be determined based on the outcome. That's how human nature works. But I think that, I'm not saying you shouldn't go by the outcome. You absolutely should, because the outcome is what we're after. It's what we're playing for. But I think at the same time, you've got to recognize that analysis post the outcome is much easier to do. And yes, you can feel like you've been justified in what you suggested if the outcome was wrong as far as you're concerned. But at the same time, you've got to be aware and you've got to understand that, it's not that cut and dry. Like, it's not that binary. This is the point around football analysis. And I feel like we've got into a place with football where, it just feels like it's all really knee jerk. Like, 1 week Arsenal are going to win the league. The next minute, they're going to fall behind. And 1 minute Liverpool going to win the league. Like, Newcastle brought it back to 2-2 with 10 men. And all of a sudden it was, Liverpool ain't going to win the league. They're not defensively strong enough this year. They're really fragile. And then they go and score a goal. 1 goal in stoppage time, and it's, well, they're definitely going to win the league now because that's what champions do. It's so flip-flop, man, and it's hard to sort of follow without losing your mind, I don't think. Afsar says, Harry, if the great Wenger was back like Arteta, do you not think he would have won major trophies by now? I say yes, he 100% would. Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Arsene Wenger was an incredible manager. And as much as I love Mikel Arteta, and as much as I think that Arsene Wenger lost his way towards the end of his Arsenal career, and it was the time to make the change at that point, he ain't done anything anywhere near Mikel Arteta, that is, to what Arsene achieved. And he cannot be discussed in the same breath as Arsene at this stage in his career. He just can't. Because what Arsene Wenger did was just incredible. Arsene Wenger goes down as one of the greatest football managers of all time. The innovations, the way he transformed so many things. He is largely responsible for the acceleration and the growth of the Premier League, in my opinion. And people will say I'm going over the top and maybe giving him a bit too much credit. I absolutely 100% believe that. Arteta isn't in Wenger's category right now. He can't be. Will he ever be? That's up for debate. And I think if you sat Mikel down right now and said, do you put yourself up with Arsene? He would say, no, of course I don't. And he'd be absolutely right. My big frustration with the end of Wenger's Arsenal career was that, for a while before that, for 10 years before he left, he weren't being backed in the way that he needed to be backed. And I struggled at the time because people, for whatever reason, didn't want to see that. And instead, they directed their anger and abuse and frustration at him, when actually it was the club, in my view, that needed to be bearing the brunt of Arsenal's drop-off. Arsene kept Arsenal competitive, kept them in the Champions League for way beyond, what was reasonably to be expected because of the lack of investment, because of losing players all the time. He had his hands tied behind his back because of the stadium and all the rest of it. And I do look at the way the club operates now and think, if we had KSE in full ownership, displaying the level of ambition that they do now, with Arsene at the helm 15 years ago, we could have dominated football because Arsene is just unbelievable in his day. And so, yeah, that is a regret that I always feel, for sure. Mark says, I'm a foreigner who hasn't visited England. Can you please explain why the English media seems so biased towards Manchester United and Liverpool? Well, first of all, they'll claim that they're not. But first of all, if you look at sort of the punditry, circles in England at the moment, you're looking at, look, Sky broadcast the most Premier League games, right? Who are their two primary pundits? Jamie Carragher, Gary Neville, ex-Liverpool, ex-Man United. Then you throw in Roy Keane, ex-Man United. You throw in Micah Richards, who's a good laugh. He's an Arsenal fan, but I don't want to say doesn't care that much. Micah Richards is not really the type of pundit that will stick the boot in on people, whereas Neville, Carragher, Keane, they're all of that ilk, right? They're old-fashioned pundits, and that's fine. I do appreciate that type of punditry, but I do feel because of their allegiances, there is a bias, okay? Also, Liverpool, Man United, the two biggest clubs in this country with the biggest support. And because they have the biggest support, I'd imagine if you're a Sky bigwig, you probably feel like you have to cater towards those people because they're the biggest chunk of your audience and the majority wins. I think that's to do with it, to be honest with you. Okay, let's see what else we've got. James says, to be frank, Arteta's season has been saved by Eze incoming because the Nelly dependency seems to be stubbornness from Arteta, and Martinelli will not contribute anything this season. I mean, you're saying it like Arteta had no hand in bringing Eze in. You're saying it as if Arteta went, nope, I only want Gabriel Martinelli. And Andrea Berta went, no, mate, you're not having Martinelli playing from the left every week. I'm going to get Eze whether you like it or not. That's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. It's not what happened at all. What else have we got? Anajit, just back on that Liverpool game. The midfield was not a bad choice to try and gain control, but we should have proactively made subs during half time to build on the platform and go for it. Our changes were reactionary. That's exactly my feeling on it. Jeremy asks about Miles Lewis-Skelly. Obviously, with Nkapie coming in and obviously Calafiori coming in and being fit, and the way that Calafiori started the season really, really strongly, I'd imagine that that's where your question comes from, that concern for how much he'll play. And he says, do you think we should move MLS into midfield? I do feel like we're a bit light in the midfield and stacked in defense now. Yeah, it's an option, isn't it? And I think that that's something that's always been in the minds of those at Arsenal Football Club. I don't think that the priority is to move Lewis-Skelly into midfield, but he certainly represents an option there. Remember, Norgard's not about at the moment either. Would anyone be massively against someone like Calafiori moving in to a more central area? I know I wouldn't be. We'd argue that Ben White could maybe play there in an emergency situation as well. So I don't think we're as short as people maybe think in that area of the pitch, because we've got options, haven't we? We've got options. You can also change the dynamic of the midfield, couldn't you? Like if you played Rice as the 6, you could probably get away with having like an Odegaard and a Marino, or Marino's in there as well. Like Marino, Odegaard, Zubimendi, Rice. That's your kind of 4. And then if you want to put a creator in there, you could chuck Eze in there. You could chuck Nwaneri in there. We've got options, man. I think with Odegaard, the great thing about him and why even when he's not playing at his brilliant best, Mikel always picks him is because you look at Nwaneri and you look at Eze and you think if they played in the midfield, you'd be a little bit lighter defensively. And that would mean that you'd have to kind of accommodate them by doing other things, tweaking and adjusting other things. Whereas with Odegaard, I think one of the reasons that Mikel likes him so much is because he feels like he can do both. He feels like he can give you what you need him to give you in the press and defensively, but also he can really bring you that spark and creativity. Whereas with some of those other players like Eze, absolutely can create, absolutely can produce spark, but can he defend from the front the way that Odegaard can? Probably not. And that's where the two differ for me, because they impact the dynamic of your midfield all round. If you swap Eze for Odegaard, probably get away with it in a lot of games, but there'll be games where you feel like you can't, maybe in terms of just impacting that balance. Okay, I am going to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate it. Great to be with you all once again. We'll be back with another episode on Thursday. I'll be joined by a special guest on tomorrow's episode as well, and we'll do some early season observations. I'm really, really looking forward to that. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful day. Remember my words. Eze will prove to be our most important signing of this summer. Why? Because that swap, Eze for Martinelli, that for me, of all the upgrades we've made across the pitch, represents the biggest one. I'll see you all on the next episode. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful Wednesday. Goodbye.